The root of Moedim is moed. It means a designated, fixed point of gathering. It implies an appointment wherein time and place are set, and both parties are agreed. They will keep it, come what may. Why did the prophets add to the Sabbath day regulations? Have you ever felt that the rules regarding the Sabbath observance were complicated or arbitrary to such an extent they were difficult to follow and were built more on tradition than the biblical text? Then you're not alone. There are a lot of people that feel that way. Good morning, everybody. It's always a pleasure to be among the brethren on a Sabbath, and it's a beautiful one, like they almost always are. We have the pleasure of Coy's message to look forward to today, so I will attempt to be direct and bring whatever economy to this message I can, considering the wealth of wisdom and insight the elders bring to this group. It's the least I can do. Codes and ordinances and edicts and regulations, dictates, decrees, laws and mandates of sundry description, they are ever present in the life of a typical citizen of any country. We've come to accept them as just a normal part of life in a civilized republic. We've come to rely on others to best apply all of these to our lives and for our own good. That's just a little bit of sarcasm there. I think most people have common sense enough that they can figure these things out on their own, but that doesn't keep regulations from oppressing us. In a book called 3 Felonies a Day, the author attempts to show the massive and sweeping scope of mainly federal authority that, when coupled with state and local laws, would render even the most conscientious fellow a criminal without peer. Perhaps you all are aware of the judicial doctrine known as civil asset forfeiture, a truly heinous thing, wherein law enforcement of any stripe can arrest you, stop your progress, that is to say, and seize anything they can find of value and force you to voluntarily forfeit the asset. Going to court to assert your right to justice will not help, as the system will just string out the prosecution until you are fatigued or broke or dispirited or all three. Eminent domain laws are increasingly pernicious in their creeping overreach and can wreck a man and his family for generations to come by seizing property for any purpose the state deems to be in its best interest and leaving the owner and his family without much by way of compensation. Seeking justice in those cases has become nearly impossible with the incomprehensible ruling by our own Supreme Court in Kelo versus New London, wherein the justices found that transferring private property from one owner to another private developer for the purpose of expanding a business and thus enhancing the local tax base serves a public benefit and therefore is allowed under the takings clause of the Fifth Amendment. That development promised the corporation, Pfizer Corp., in this case, if I'm not mistaken, in this case, never commenced, and the land remains vacant to this day, so far as I know. All of these are examples of authority that has gone awry. They simply do not make sense in a conditionally free republic that once protected private property rights. Now, I have a reason for bringing this up. Cultural mores and communal traditions can have a way of blinding us to the way God would have us live our lives. We assume certain things are chiseled in stone when, in fact, they are just deeply embedded traditions. I am no exception. I fall prey to it like anybody else does. Now, in an attempt to break out of that and be uncharacteristically forward-thinking, I have recently been considering my final arrangements and the disposition of my meager estate. My will is simple, holographic, to the point. It merely says, the kid gets everything. I only have the one son. I signed my name, authorized it by my own hand, and applied the apposite marks of authenticity. I asked no lawyers for advice, and I expended absolutely no effort ascertaining the legality of my enterprise. And just so there can be no question that I am the originator, I added to the very end of it my own personal stamp in the form of an irrevocable declaration, which states, no taxes are owed on my estate by anyone. That is a parting gift to my son. When the Fed showed his doorstep, he can wave the will in their faces and hope for the best, but that's about all he's going to be able to do. Such things are not common, and I know that, but it once was. And with respect to my impending interment, I decided that only a natural burial will do. That is not common in this day and age either, as most cemeteries require a concrete vault or other encasement for the casket to be lowered into and subsequently sealed. And that won't do for me. Now, you might think that regulations have decided the issue and you have no options, but that is far from the case. In my research, I became aware of the fact that a natural burial is a God-given right and not to be abridged, and is widely accepted as such. But what to do about the cemetery regulations requiring a concrete vault was a bit vexing until I found you can be interred in a plot reserved for folks like me. It's called a green burial. The cost of those lots is prohibitive, as most green alternatives tend to be, so that was a dead end. Thank you. Further research revealed a right to be buried on private property. That was welcome news. I can be buried in my back garden, and no one can interfere, as it is a long-standing, God-given right. And so it will be. There will be no fancy coffin, no polished stone monument, no memorial of any kind, just a pine slab with my body wrapped in linen and secured with rope, lowered into the ground to become dust. For out of it I was taken, and to it I shall return. I'll provide the pine wood slab and the linen wrap, so no need to worry about that, Derek. My neighbor has a backhoe, so opening the grave should not be a problem. What little I know of the man would suggest he's not the type to ask why you need a hole dug in your back garden in the configuration of a grave. Not to mention the fact that a natural burial on my own property is pretty cheap compared to traditional burials in cemeteries. Now, it has to be noted that such a thing will need to be disclosed to the new owners of my property, and that might have a chilling effect on the sale. But it won't bother me one bit. My point here is that just because your culture attempts to assert its way into your life with false authority, coercing you into giving up your God-given rights, does not mean you have to quietly acquiesce. In a previous message regarding Sabbath day observance, the text tells us the first Sabbath day was made holy by God, and that continues unto this very day. You will notice the day is not named in the text of the creation narrative, except as the seventh day, and it is said to be a day of rest. The day is not named until we get to Exodus chapter 16 and verse 23, which reads, "Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord." Moses told this to the Israelites. Exodus 16 establishes the wilderness pattern. A double portion of manna on the sixth day. Food preparations in advance. Remain in place. Let no man go out. And no gathering on the seventh day. On the seventh day, when some went out to gather, they found nothing. And the Lord says to Moses, How long will you refuse to keep my commandments? The Sabbath day observance as a weekly requirement is a part of the Ten Commandments, is reinforced in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 8, wherein Moses presents God's command for a weekly rest to the nation of Israel. And you will remember in the creation narrative, God entered into the day along with the first humans, a day already marked, holy, and complete. There exists no need for man to exhaust himself with effort to earn his way into the Sabbath, at least according to the text. Only God can make a thing holy, and that includes time. And of course, he has never rescinded a command. The Hebrew word Sabbath, as we've talked about before, means rest. I think we all know that. And that is to say, it is a cessation of creative activity, the kind of activity you engage in the other days of the week. It does not mean a day to recover from weariness or fatigue, although, of course, we also do that. There's a great deal of refreshment in pausing our work life and coming together to fellowship with one another. And it is the climax of the creation narrative. And as such, it has special significance. The scriptural reference there is found in Genesis 2, verses 1 through 3. You're all very familiar with these words of God. Quoting, Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. It is significant, at least for us, owing to God entering into it right along with man. The text is specific with respect to melakah, that is the Hebrew word for purposeful, directed, goal-oriented, and skilled activity. The sort of thing we are prohibited doing on the Sabbath. Not avodah, the Hebrew word for hard, difficult, grinding labor, as in slavery or forced work. The Hebrew is exacting here, and melakah is used specifically to describe the craftsman constructing the tabernacle. Avodah is not used in the commandment from God. The Sabbath prohibition is not no effort. It is not no movement. It is no directed, purposeful, goal-oriented work. The day is set apart, that is to say, made holy, and it is set that way before any penalty or law appears in the text. In contemplating legitimate authority in Scripture, I tend to look to the earliest mention of it, and in this case, I am compelled to examine the meaning of the verse, "Let there be light." I think we've all asked ourselves, what is that light? Why is that the first thing to be infused into the entirety of creation? It seems significant there should be this explosion of an all-encompassing light that is not terrestrial or celestial, as those are created on the fourth day, but something else. Perhaps it is something spiritual. There can be no higher authority than that of God the Father. And the power and authority he vests in Jesus is unquestioned. It is possible that the light spoken of on the first day is God establishing Jesus' authority to engage in the act of creation. That declaration can be a comfort to the believer when the prosecutor whispers lies in our ears that seem to challenge God's legitimate authority. A sweeping authority so vast it will save our very lives. I will give you 5 references you can look up at your leisure. In John 5:26 and 27, Ephesians 1:20 through 22, John chapter 17 and verse 2, Colossians chapter 2, verses 9 and 10, and Matthew 28:18, and you folks are familiar with all of those. We see the confirmation of that authority, but no mention of the means by which that authority is actively vested in Jesus. I can see no more important a task on the first day of creation than to establish Jesus' authority to engage upon the will of the Father in that act of creation. Obviously, that's speculation, but it is not unreasoning speculation. That light is very important and is different from the light created on the 4th day. I see no logical reason there should be 2 instances to create the same thing. In Genesis 1, verses 14 through, I think, 19, maybe a little longer, and I quote, "Then God said, 'Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and appointed times, and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light on earth.' And it was so. Then God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth and to rule over the day and over the night and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the 4th day." That word translated as appointed times or seasons, as some translations would have it, is the Hebrew word moedim. It's the word used throughout the text to designate a sacred time in the calendar, every feast, every holy convocation. The first holy day listed on that calendar is the Sabbath. Leviticus chapter 23, before any annual feast is listed, we see the weekly Sabbath in verse 3. These now are the words of God, and I quote, "6 days shall labor be done, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work on it. It is the Sabbath of the Lord in all your dwellings." End quote. This is the text that ties the Sabbath day to the celestial mandate in Genesis 1:14. It could be said, just examining the text, that a solemn rest, a complete cessation of work that occupies your mind, is the best means to facilitate a whole-minded, wholehearted focus on God. When we focus on the creative work of the other days of the week, it is not possible to split our attention and focus on God in heaven. The root of Moedim is moed. It means a designated, fixed point of gathering. It implies an appointment wherein time and place are set, and both parties are agreed. They will keep it, come what may. Both parties are expected to show up. When you read this word, you know it is the language of an appointment. In Semitic languages, Ugaritic and Aramaic, the root carries the same sense and implication, a fixed, designated gathering point. A word in one language that shares the same origin as a similar word in another language is not proof of meaning, but it points to a common path. In those languages, they are not saying those moedim are decorative or abstract or aesthetic in any way, but that they are marking specific appointments, fixed times and places. And that is what moedim means everywhere it appears in the text. So when the text says the luminaries are for moedim, it is not saying these are decorative markers of time, but that they mark specific appointments at fixed times. It's why our holy gatherings and our feasts can be at different times on our calendar, but they are not different times according to the way God asks us to keep track of those times. Those appointments at fixed times are important, as we all know. And that is where we see the precise location into which the Sabbath is placed in Leviticus 23. In Leviticus 23, we see the Sabbath is named before any annual feast is named. The Sabbath holds first place. And we cannot ignore the implication that it is structural. That is to say, foundational to God's will. Let's look now at Lamentations 2, chapter 6. He has done violence in his tabernacle, as if it were a garden. He has destroyed his place of assembly. The Lord has caused the appointed feasts and Sabbaths to be forgotten in Zion. In his burning indignation, he has spurned the king and the priest. You will notice the Sabbaths were not violated, but they were purposed to be forgotten. The people lost the knowledge of how to observe them. In Hosea 2:11, I will also cause all her mirth to cease, her first days, her new moons, her Sabbaths, all her appointed feasts. Those two passages group together the Moedim. In Lamentations, it is appointed feasts, Sabbaths, and the place of gathering. In Hosea, it is feast days, new moons, and Sabbaths. New moons and Sabbaths are placed together in the forgetting and are named as belonging to the same system in the passage that says that system was caused to be lost. Now, how could an entire nation of people forget a Sabbath that is tied to a lunar observation that anyone could make for themselves? Well, they did not forget how to use the luminaries as an identifying device for Moedim. They forgot the communal traditions or the chain of memory that became their authority in lieu of God's commands. That's not too difficult for us to imagine, as folks often rely on traditions and cultural norms to guide them in their daily lives without actually examining the validity of it. In Hosea 8:5, and I'll just give a few references here as evidence and then read a few for you. The first one is 2 Kings 4:23, Isaiah 1:13, 2 Chronicles 2:4, Nehemiah 10:33, Numbers 28:9 through 15, Isaiah 66:23, and Psalms 81:3. We see emerging a pattern across times and authors and genres that hint strongly at a relationship between new moons and Sabbaths. In Hosea 8:5, the people ask, "When will the new moon be passed, that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath, that we may trade wheat?" The new moon was a Sabbath day with feasts and special sacrifices that precluded engaging in commerce. And that is not entirely the end of it, but I seem to have lost the last page somewhere. The point of it is that throughout the history of the Hebrews and the Jews, there have been traditions that have been passed down that quite often weren't ever called into question. And if you look at Hebrews chapter 4, you will see that God, in his wrath, pointed out that the people in Israel, in Sinai, that nation, were very much in rebellion. And his wrath came to settle upon them in devastating ways. They just couldn't seem to enter into his rest.